start with the public hearing in just a few minutes. We're waiting for a few more people. So if you'll just hang on, we'll get started in about 3 minutes. Welcome, everybody, to the State of Wyoming public hearing for the 2017 Annual Action Plan. This is our plan on how we spend our HUD funds, Housing and Urban Development Funds, in the next year. The purpose of this meeting is to let Wyoming citizens know the guidelines for how HUD funds can be spent and to get feedback from the public on how they would like to see these funds prioritized. The hearing is being held simultaneously in Cheyenne, Casper, and via webinar, and this will be on our website as soon as we can get it on our website. We will be taking public comment through October 10th, and any public comments can be made today also. And at the end of the presentation, there will be a slide on how to make your public comments. What we're going to do today is we're going to start off and we're going to have an overview of the Community Development Block Grant. Stephanie Horton from the Wyoming Business Council will be giving this presentation. Then the Emergency Solutions Grant, that'll be Janice Haldy from Department of Family Services. Housing for Persons with AIDS, Tony Reeves from Department of Health. And then the Wyoming Community Development Authority, Edie Phillips, will be talking about the Home Investment Partnership Program, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and the National Housing Trust Fund. We do have everybody on mute at this time. You do have the opportunity to ask questions by typing in a box down in the left-hand corner. And we'll watch those as we go along, but I think we'll do most of our presentations and then take any public comment towards the end, but we will be watching that box. So I am going to turn this over to Stephanie Horton with the Wyoming Business Council.
All right, thank you, Kim. This is Stephanie Horton. I'm the Senior Grant and Loan Specialist for the CDBG program. The program manager, Sandy Quinlan, she was unable to attend, but we'll have her contact information if you should think of any questions later on. And then on the phone, we have our Community Development Director, Julie Kozlowski. So this will be your opportunity to learn about the Community Development Block Grant and how it can be used. Plus, we'll go over how CDBG works specifically in Wyoming. And then what we want from you is feedback on what you don't like and what you would like to see done differently. As I mentioned before, Sandy Quinlan is the program manager. If you have any questions later, this is her contact information. All right, for more specific resources regarding the Community Development Block Grant Program, this HUD Exchange website has an expansive amount of resources. So this is a really great way to get specific information if you are unable to immediately get it from us, if you want to browse through the documents, if you want to learn more about it. All right, so here's how the Wyoming Community Development Block Grant Program is structured. Community development, which includes housing infrastructure and acquisition, economic development, which includes planning, home ownership assistance, and imminent threat. One of the 3 national objectives must be met to qualify for CDBG funds. The 3 objectives are benefit to low to moderate income persons, aid in the prevention of or elimination of slums or blight, and activities designed to meet urgent community needs that are declared a national disaster by the governor. The proposed method of distribution for the 2017 grant funds is the proposed appropriation is $2,797,710. Of that amount, $183,931 will be used for administrative funds for the year of 2017. The remaining $2.6 million will be divided between economic development and community development. Community and economic development infrastructure grants. The maximum grant awards for public infrastructure grants, public facility grants, economic development, infrastructure grants, housing infrastructure grants, and downtown development grants are $500,000, and the maximum for ADA grants is $300,000. The cost per job for an economic development project is $35,000. So if you project 4 jobs or new jobs on a project, you get $35,000 for each of those, and the maximum award is $140,000. For 2017, we will not be doing planning grants, so we won't go over that information today. The home ownership assistance, the proposed allocation for these grants is $40,000, available to nonprofit organizations through a local government. The maximum subsidy of $5,000 per housing unit. It can be subsidized interest rates and mortgage principal amounts for low and moderate income home buyers, and finance acquisition by low and moderate income home buyers of housing that will be owner occupied by the home buyers or will be their primary residence. For imminent threat grants, the proposed allocation is actually 0 at this time, as there are currently no potential applicants. Imminent threat grants are a $250,000 maximum with no matching funds required. The activity must meet an urgent community development need, and it's based upon the approval of an emergency declaration that needs to be signed by the governor. So our timeline now is we will have the public comment period beginning September 8th and ending October 10th. We will hold another public hearing on the annual action plan on November 7th. Then we will have an additional public comment period November 8th through December 8th. The Wyoming Business Council, the WCDA, and Health will need their board approvals, and that's between December and March. Then we'll submit to HUD in January if we receive notification of allocations, and then the HUD review will take place from January through March. If you have any questions or comments, both the program manager, Sandy Quinlan, and my contact information is here. And thank you very much.
Stephanie, this is Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I just wanted to add for those folks on the webinar today that one of the considerations that we're mulling at this time is one of the slides indicated a maximum of $500,000 for the majority of our grants. And we're considering raising that limit to $700,000 or $750,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, because some of the feedback we got in our last monitoring by HUD was that with the few staff that we have available, we might want to consider doing fewer projects, but providing a little more funding for those. And so that's certainly a consideration. And at this point, we'd really like to gather some feedback on whether that is helpful or not, and if we do change that limit, what should it be? And other than that, I would just let you know that it's quick, I know, when we're looking at slides on a screen or whatever, but Stephanie's contact information, Sandy's, and my own is available on the Wyoming Business Council website, which is wyomingbusiness.org. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Our next presenter is Janice Hawley from the Department of Family Services.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. I'm here to talk about the Emergency Solutions Grant. This grant is not strictly something that is for homeless people. It is also for people who are about to be homeless and who want to remain in their current home. ESG funding provides assistance to help people quickly regain stability and permanent housing after experiencing a housing crisis and or homelessness. So you see there it's housing crisis or homelessness. So both of those activities are ones that are very important for this grant. Funding is provided by this grant to engage homeless individuals and families living on the street, to improve the number and quality of emergency shelters for the homeless population, and to help operate these shelters. It's also important to provide essential services to shelter residents, rapidly rehouse homeless individuals and families, and prevent families and individuals from becoming homeless. That's really the emphasis. These last two items are the emphasis that HUD has had for the last 2 years and continues to be an important part of what they consider is critical for this grant and how the funding is used. They want us to find situations or agencies that work with those who are currently homeless but need to or want to get back into a house, and those who are in imminent danger of being evicted from a house. So to stay in a house and to get right back into a housing situation is where HUD wants us to present most of our dollars. The Wyoming Department of Family Services is the recipient of the Emergency Solutions Grant funds. We work very closely with the Wyoming Homeless Collaborative. This is a group of agencies throughout the state that work together to improve the situation for homeless individuals and families. There are important aspects of this grant, which include the ones that are shown here on the current slide. It includes prevention of homelessness, outreach and assessment of homeless individuals and families, emergency shelter, transitional shelter, permanent housing, and supportive services. Services to prevent homelessness include support for affordable housing development, job training, vocational rehabilitation, access to mental health and substance abuse care, housing programs that bridge the gap between foster care and prison discharge systems, and permanent housing. Pardon me. So you can see this is not just for those people who are homeless, but there are a lot of other activities and services that are wrapped up in this whole process of granting these funds for agencies throughout the state. Pardon me. There are 5 sections under the ESG, or as HUD labels them, 5 activities under the HUD label, and these include street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, administration. There's also a portion of the grant funds that are used for the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. Now I will explain a little bit more about each of these activities. Street outreach includes engagement for those people who are currently out on the street. These are people who are homeless. Maybe they don't want to be homeless or know how to seek out help and other services. And so street outreach is used by a number of the different shelters and agencies throughout the state to help those people who need critical services. So that includes engaging these individuals, providing case management for them to see what kinds of things can be done to help them, providing emergency health services, emergency mental health services, transportation to doctor's appointments or job interviews, and services to special populations. So there are a lot of things that street outreach covers in terms of trying to reach out to the individuals who are out on the street and are not in a shelter situation. Now for emergency shelter, those activities include emergency services such as child care, education services, employment assistance and job training, outpatient health services, mental health and substance abuse services. Some of these are offered, but usually not all of them are offered through an emergency shelter, but you'll find in dealing with a number of the agencies throughout the state that a lot of these provisions are included in what they can provide to those people who are living in their shelter, seeking their services for help to get out of their homeless situation. In addition to that, there is part of the grant funds under emergency shelter that can be used for rehabilitation and renovation of current shelters. Actual shelter operations might include a hotel or motel voucher if there is no actual shelter in the community, or food, rent, and utilities are also provisions that can be made for people who are homeless. Homelessness prevention is for those who are in a home and or about to be evicted from their home. So it's to prevent them from becoming homeless. And it's to help these people regain stability in current housing or other permanent housing. It's for individuals and families, and this does include short and medium-term rental assistance and housing relocation. And usually this term of rental assistance is between 1 and 4 months. It's not a long-term situation, but it's a short-term assistance to get them stabilized. Rapid rehousing is used for those people who have become homeless and want to move back into a housing situation. So this provides financial assistance for individuals and families who are needing to relocate their housing and find stabilization services to help them maintain a housing situation. And this also provides short and medium-term rental assistance. Again, that's between 1 and 4 months. The grant does also provide some funding for administrative activities. We are allowed to give up to 7.5% of the ESG, the total ESG funds for administrative activities. And normally, an agency that applies for grant funding will include money for administrative costs. This money is shared between state and the subrecipients. The Homeless Management Information System is one that is developed exclusively for the homeless information that is required by HUD. All of the people or all of the agencies who apply for and use Emergency Solutions grant funding must utilize the HMIS because this is how we collect data. It's on the same type of database for everyone. It provides a level playing field for all of the information that we are collecting. And the report of this information actually goes to the Congress. So we need to make sure that we have correct information, and the way to do that is for the agencies to utilize the Homeless Management Information System. We have this year we have a new administrator for this system, and we are very encouraged that we are collecting the correct information that HUD requires. That's it in a nutshell for the Emergency Solutions Grant. If you have any questions with regards to this information, or if you have any comments and you would like to contact me, here is my contact information. I am here in Cheyenne in the halfway building up on the 5th floor. Please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Janice. The next person that we have on here is Tony Reeves from the Wyoming Department of Health. And will you click over here on the screen, Stephanie? It's visual on that. Does it let me click? Okay, Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you'll just tell me next, I'll hit the button for your next slide.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Reeves. I am the Benefits Coordinator for the Communicable Disease Treatment Program. And on behalf of myself and Shelley Hood, who is the Communicable Disease Treatment Program Manager, I'd like to talk to everyone today about a little bit about the Housing Opportunity for Persons with AIDS, or the HUD grant that the Wyoming Department of Health administers. Next. So the allowable uses for the HOPWA grant are very similar to the ESG grant. We have the tenant-based rental assistance program, which is very similar to Section 8, where the client pays approximately 30% of their income towards their housing, and the HOPWA grant pays the remainder. We have, yes? Okay. We have the STRUMU. No, go back, please.
Sorry.
Oh.
We have the STRUMU, which is the short-term rent, mortgage, and utility, which is assist with past due rent, mortgage, and utilities. It does have some limitations to it. That is that. We have permanent housing, which assists with applications for, if there's an application fee for a client to apply for an apartment. It helps with deposits for rent, utility. It can also help with the first month's rent if it's listed as part of the lease. We have our emergency shelter services that for individuals in their local community, they can obtain emergency shelter for up to 60 days while they search for a place to live or a job as needed. The HOPWA grant supports transportation for clients to get to and from their medical and supportive services appointments. We have non-medical case management available in all 23 counties. We can also do nutritional services such as Boost, Ensure, vitamins, meetings with registered dietitians, and then of course the HOPWA grant can also assist with outpatient mental health. Next. So for this particular program, the individuals must be HIV positive, they must be a resident of Wyoming, and they have to meet the gross household income guideline at or below 80% of the area media income. That is really it for the HOPWA grant. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Shelley. I don't see any down in the comment section right now, so, not Shelley, Tony. Thanks, Tony. Our next presenter is WCDA, and are you guys on the telephone line here? We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with WCDA, so let's see if we have her unmuted. Edie?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you great.
Okay.
Do you want to just tell me next, or do you want me to turn the presentation over to you guys in Casper?
It may be easier to turn it over if that's okay with you, but either way works for me.
Okay, we're going to just get this here. Okay.
Are we good to go?
Is that the correct screen? Nope, that isn't.
Do
Oops, we just lost you.
can you get my slides back up?
They're working on it.
Okay. If this doesn't work, we can just do next. You know, I can tell you to go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that because I don't even show your, I made you the presenter and kind of now you're gone. I apologize, everybody. We'll get this fixed in just a minute.
You folks still there?
Yes, we are still there.
Okay. So do you want me to just go ahead and say next for the
Nope,
slides?
you have control now. We got
Okay,
it.
thank you very much. Okay. Thanks for attending the 2017 Annual Action Plan. Wyoming Community Development Authority administers 3 programs that are part of the Annual Action Plan: the Home Investment Partnership Act, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and the National Housing Trust Fund. As far as program funding, the home program receives an annual allocation of $3.5 million. We do have an additional $1 million of program income annually, so our total amount for the home program is $4.5 million. The Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which I'm going to start referring to as NSP, we actually have $1.3 million of just program income. No program funds are being received under the NSP program. And then the newest program that we're administering is the National Housing Trust Fund, and we receive $3 million annually for that program. The first program I'm going to talk about is the home program, and the objective of home is to provide decent affordable housing to low-income households. Also, it has the objective of expanding the capacity of non-profit housing providers, and then also strengthening state and local governments to provide housing, and also the process of leveraging the private sector participation in the program. WCDA administers the $3.5 million that the state of Wyoming receives, with up to 10% of that $3.5 million to be used for administration, and then 5% of it can be used for community housing development organizations' operating expenses, and then a minimum of 15% is set aside for CHODO housing development. There are very specific timelines to commit and expend the funds. Eligible applicants for the program, these are the folks that can submit applications to utilize the home funds. Could be incorporated cities and towns, counties, nonprofit and for-profit developers, and housing authorities. Eligible activities under the home program include new construction and acquisition or rehab for both rental housing and homeowner activities. We also have financing and down payment assistance for homebuyer activities, and we can provide tenant-based rental assistance. This is a list of activities and fees that are prohibited uses of the home program. The key here is that these are identified in the Act as not allowed. They are the acquisition of vacant land or the demolition, unless it's tied with the construction of affordable housing. We cannot set aside reserve accounts or operating subsidies for rental projects. And it cannot be used for a home in conjunction with Section 8 or voucher-based assistance. It cannot be used for match for other federal programs, nor can it be used for the development of public housing. And we cannot use it to acquire any property that's owned by WCDA. There's no project-based rental assistance available in the home program, and we cannot pay for any delinquent taxes, fees, or charges, or fees cannot be charged by rental property owners. And a real key here is we cannot pay for emergency repairs with home. This is a list of the eligible property costs that the home program can pay for. They are all related to the eligible activities that I listed before. Primarily we see new construction, rehab, reconstruction, and then the associated costs with that, which include the related soft costs. Eligible forms of subsidy. The home program can be interest-bearing or non-interest-bearing loans or advances. There can be forgivable and repayable deferred loans. There are interest subsidies, equity investments, and loan guarantees and loan guarantee accounts. And then HUD can approve other forms of subsidy. The amount of the subsidy for home is a minimum of $1,000 per unit assisted, and then on a yearly basis, HUD does provide the maximum per unit subsidy, and we outline that in the Affordable Housing Allocation Plan. Other items to consider: the value and purchase price of the property are restricted. There is a market assessment which identifies a need in the market and also demand in the market, and we also are required to underwrite the project. Developer capacity, with the home final rule, we are required now to assess the developer experience and then the capacity to develop a project, and then whether or not the developer has the financial resources sufficient to carry out the project. The beneficiary of the home funds, there are specific rules that require home funds to assist households with an area median income of 80% or below. If it is a rental activity that's further restricted to those projects or those the area median income of 60% or below. And then if the project has 5 or more home assisted units, 20% of those units must be occupied with families at 50% or below. And typically we see the 50% area median income utilized for the home program. With rental housing, this is the primary use of home funds in Wyoming. Rents are strictly controlled. Tenants must meet income requirements. And both of the rent and the income restrictions are long-term. They can range anywhere from 5 to 55 years, but we do see projects that go well beyond the 55-year restrictions. They can be single and multiple sites, and it can be public or private ownership. Additional considerations, this is a list of additional items that come into play if you're using home funds. There is a 25% match requirements from non-federal sources. WCDA does have what we call a banked match that currently allows for projects to be submitted with only 5% match. The remaining 20% is coming from that banked match. There are affordability periods, and that varies based on the amount of the subsidy in the project. And then there is a number of other cross-cutting regulations that come into play for property standards, environmental review, both labor and fair housing requirements, site and neighborhood standards, and then also the lead-based paint. So these are all items that, in addition to home requirements, these are additional considerations that come into play. The primary uses of home are, as I said earlier, new construction of rental housing, the rehab of rental housing, and then we also have a component of where we have a homeowner rehabilitation program that is administered by WCDA, and it's called the Wyoming Rehabilitation and Acquisition Program. For homeowner rehabilitation, eligible applicants are cities, counties, and nonprofits. There are restrictions that are additional detail is outlined in our allocation plan, but the restrictions include the value of the home. It is restricted, of course, to low-income households. The property ownership is restricted, the type of property, eligible costs, and the affordability period. So all of these are, as I said, are further explained in our allocation plan. There is a special nonprofit identified in the home regulations, and it's a community housing development organization referred to as CHODO. This is a nonprofit that has qualified to be determined as a community housing development organization, and there are minimum amount of funds that are allocated to the CHODOs, and there are pre-development loans that are available to CHODOs also. The CHODO can develop, sponsor, or own property through the home program. I talked about the Wyoming Rehabilitation and Acquisition Program. This is a WCDA administered program where we acquire houses, we rehabilitate them, and then make them available to a home buyer who meets specific income and underwriting criteria. This particular area is the last discussion for the home program. I'm going to now move on to the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. This was a short-term program. It was established with the HERA program, HERA Act, the Housing Economic Recovery Act of 2008, and the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. We're no longer receiving grant funds under this program. We do, however, the way that it was designed in Wyoming, we do receive program income, and once that program income is sufficient, we can use it for the Wyoming Rehabilitation and Acquisition Program. It can also be used for rental opportunities, and then we do have an administrative fee. The focus of this program are in areas of the greatest need, and they're identified as Campbell, Fremont, Laramie, Natrona, Sweetwater, and Uintah counties. The newest program that we have with the that we administer here at WCDA is the National Housing Trust Fund. It was also enacted with the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, HERA, in 2008. However, it was only funded in 2016. That was the first time that funds were made available through the National Housing Trust Fund. The objective of the Housing Trust Fund is to increase, preserve the supply of decent, safe, and sanitary, affordable housing for extremely low-income families and very low-income families. The extremely low-income family level is area median income of 30% or below. The very low income level is at 50% or below. The National Housing Trust Fund is very similar to the home program with the following exceptions. There is no match requirement for the Housing Trust Fund. 100% of the funds must be identified at or below 30% of area median income. The very low income households only come into play if there's sufficient funds, if there's $1 billion or more that can be allocated in the program. So at this point, the funds are only at the 30% area median income level. It can be used for public housing units, and it can be used in conjunction with the low-income housing tax credit. The other area that's important to point out is the affordability period must be at least 30 years. And there is no CHOTA requirement in the National Housing Trust Fund. As I said, this is the focus on this particular program is to provide rental housing for extremely low income families. WCDA has been designated to administer the $3 million that Wyoming receives annually, and we can use up to 10% of it for administration. Up to 10% can be used for home ownership activities, and a minimum of 80% must be used for rental housing activities. There are specific timelines to commit and spend funds. We must enter into written agreements with owners or developers to reserve the funds within 24 months of Wyoming receiving the funds. We have 24 months to commit funds into HUD's National Housing Trust Fund system, and we actually have 5 years to spend the funds. Again, the eligible applicants are very similar to the home program. While it says a CHOTA is an eligible applicant, you're not required to be certified as a CHOTA utilizing the National Housing Trust Fund. Eligible activities under the National Housing Trust Fund are new construction, acquisition, and or rehabilitation of rental housing. Also, homeowner activities for first-time home buyers can be new construction, acquisition, and or rehabilitation. We can also have operating expense assistance and set aside operating reserves for the project. As we saw in the home program, there are prohibited activities and fees with the National Housing Trust Fund, very similar to the home program. We cannot provide assistance to a project previously assisted with National Housing Trust Fund funds. Again, we can't acquire property owned by WCDA. We can't pay for taxes, delinquent taxes, fees, or charges on National Housing Trust Fund projects. We cannot pay for political activities, advocacy, lobbying, counseling services, etc. We cannot pay for administration, outreach, or other costs managed and operate WCDA's National Housing Trust Fund. And then there are specific other costs identified. They're eligible project costs and administrative and planning costs. If they're not identified as eligible in those 93.201 and 93.202 of the Act, then we cannot pay for those items either. These are eligible. This is a list of eligible program costs that we can pay for, and the development hard costs for construction of a project, refinancing, acquisition, related soft costs to those activities, and then we can pay for operating cost assistance and reserves, but those are limited to less than or equal to 30% of the annual grant. And then we can refinance temporary loans. Eligible forms of subsidies are interest, non-interest bearing loans, forgivable and repayable deferred loans, interest subsidies, equity investments, grants, and other forms that are approved by HUD. Again, there are minimum and maximum per unit subsidies, and these will be outlined in our Affordable Housing Allocation Plan. They're established annually by WCDA. We have additional considerations: the value and purchase price of the property. The market assessment is required to determine need and market demand, and we are required to underwrite projects. Again, we're required to assess the developer capacity, the experience, the capacity of the developer to develop the project, and then making sure that they have the financial resources sufficient to carry out the project. Beneficiaries, again, are 100% of the funds must go to low-income households with an annual gross income of 30% of area median income. Additional considerations for the National Housing Trust Fund, which are very similar to home, but I wanted to point out 3 different areas that apply. The affordability period, as I discussed earlier, it is a minimum of 30 years. The environmental review, HUD is currently developing the rules around the environmental review requirement. Information that I have received indicates that it will be very similar to the requirements of the home program. And then the one area that does not apply that are the Davis-Bacon requirements. So that's a key component of the National Housing Trust Fund. To give you an idea of the rental housing, it can be rehabilitation, acquisition and or rehabilitation, and new construction. Rents are strictly controlled. Tenants must meet income requirements. And as I said earlier, that the rent and income restrictions are for the long term with a minimum of 30 years. There can be single or multiple sites, and it can have public and private ownership. For rehab of rental housing, there are maximum and minimums. Again, WCDA will have those identified in our Affordable Housing Allocation Plan. There will be a capital needs assessment. Must be performed by an unrelated professional provider. We will review the owner's management practices, and the Uniform Relocation Act does apply. For home ownership, it can also be rehabilitation, acquisition and rehabilitation, and new construction. It must be a first-time home buyer, and the buyer must meet the 30% income requirement. They must live in the home as their primary residence, and they will be required to take a home buyer education class. The affordability requirement must not be less than 30 years, and upon sale of the property, resale and recapture provisions do apply. You can have a lease purchase provision, and again, underwriting standards will apply. The ongoing, once a project has been developed, there are ongoing compliance requirements. There is the 30-year affordability period, so WCDA will be reviewing the project for 30 years at least, or whatever is identified in the application for the project. All beneficiaries must be income qualified at the 30%, and those rents are updated annually. Rental households must be recertified annually. All fair housing laws apply, and there will be an on-site inspection will be done per HUD requirements, and there is an ongoing financial oversight of a project. This is the end of the presentation for the National Housing Trust Fund. I just want to make you aware that we are currently working on the 2016 allocation plan and the annual certification of that plan. And what we're identifying here are the 2017. So we're, in order to make sure that we're moving forward with our funding requirements, that this is indeed for going, utilizing the funds in the year 2017. There is an allocation process for all programs, and beginning as January approaches, we will send out notification that the application period open, and the application is available on our website. We typically submit, the deadline submission is the last working day of January, and the application and our affordable housing allocation plan, which includes all the requirements of the 3 programs that I've discussed, will be on the WCDA website. And we are, the comment period begins September 8th, which is tomorrow, and it will end October 11th. We are requesting comments to be submitted regarding anything that you would like to discuss regarding the 3 programs, the home, NSP, and the Housing Trust Fund. If you would like to submit those to the address that's listed on the screen, or they could also be emailed to either myself, Edie Phillips, at phillips@wyomingcda.com, or Leslie Wright, either one of those. And then the last slide, whoops, the last slide does contain other resources that can be utilized to understand the programs. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Edie. I want to thank everybody for attending this public hearing on the HUD funds for Wyoming. Our public comment period for the 2017 Annual Action Plan is September 8th through October 10th. That's a typo there, October 10th. And you can submit comments and questions to Stephanie Horton at the information below. We are going to attempt to unmute everybody to see if there's any public comments today before we get started. So if we'll just okay, that didn't work to unmute all, but I don't see any comments down in the comment period. So I want to thank everybody for attending and just encourage everybody on the phone to send their comments again to Stephanie Horton at the information there. Julie, do you have anything to add before we go?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, I don't have anything else to add except that I can't see who all is on the webinar who might be participating, but for those of you out there that utilize these programs, please do send us your comments. That's the only way that we can structure programs, and I'm speaking for the Business Council, but I'm pretty sure that this is for all agencies, that we want these programs to be utilized to their best benefit and to reach the people that really need it. And so the more feedback we get from those that utilize the programs, the better we can do by you in terms of structuring them and making them easy to use. So hopefully we'll get some comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one question. We're going to unmute. You should be unmuted. All righty. Well, if like I said, if anybody has any questions or comments, please get a hold of the Wyoming Business Council, Department of Health, Department of Family Services, or WCDA, and we'll go ahead and end this public hearing. Thank you.